All right, so what do we got? FDR. Who is FDR? And how did he try to help the U.S. economy through the Great Depression? Eddie, what do you have?
I said that FDR is the nation's 32nd president who was voted during the Great Depression, and he tried to help benefit the economy by establishing the New Deal.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So FDR, President of the United States, taking after President Hoover, which we mentioned a lot of the hardships that were faced by President Hoover. And really, for much of his presidency, he just thought the economy would just correct itself. But that never happened. And we talked about the Holly Smoot tariff. We talked about trickle down economics. We talked eventually about the bonus army and a lot of the hardships he faced. But eventually, with the Hoover Dam, these public works programs that the government would supply to the people, that would benefit the U.S. economy somewhat and give these people hope as we're going through these troubling times. And these public works programs would obviously help with the infrastructure and benefit with industrial and agricultural growth all across the United States. So FDR, as he's coming into office, he kind of looks at this idea of these government-funded agencies and jobs, and he wants to apply that to the economy. He wants to try to make our economy in somewhat of a mixed market economy, a mixed market society, where, yeah, we have capitalism, we have private business, that's primary our economy. But we also have an inclusion of social programs and government jobs that will also benefit the infrastructure, benefit society as a whole. And he's going to take this New Deal and create many different agencies and government-funded jobs to try to rebuild our society, try to help with infrastructure, building of roads, bridges, dams, okay, schools, libraries, you name it. And at the same time, give these people jobs and give these people hope through these difficult times. All right, so what other issues did FDR face? So yeah, he's taken the role as president during the Great Depression. And it was probably one of the most problematic times in American history. And eventually, we already talked a little bit about it, World War II. So he has a big, he has a lot of food on his plate here. So what else did he have to face, though, through these difficult times that we mentioned on Friday? What else did he have to face? What problems did he encounter? And maybe personal issues. Gabe, do you remember?
Well, personal issues. His legs were paralyzed, right?
Yeah, he was paralyzed, right? Okay, he had polio. And the only way he could really get around was with these braces that were very restrictive. He couldn't even really walk, all right? And he needed people to help him, prop him up when he was giving speeches. Okay, when he was walking to these podiums, he oftentimes was held up by people walking to it. And a lot of the times he was just sitting down. So he couldn't even really walk. This person couldn't even, obviously put pants on, put clothes on. And he's supposed to lead the country through the most difficult time, it ever faced. So obviously this was going to be a very problematic issue. This is going to be very struggling for him in his personal life. And at the same time, trying to be that beacon of light for many people through the Great Depression and World War II. And, you only can imagine, obviously, the hardships he faced and some of the problems, obviously, he was going through. And a lot of these pictures weren't even shown to the American public, right? They never showed him in a wheelchair. They never showed the braces that he had to use every single day when he was trying to give a speech or stand upright. Why do you think they didn't show those pictures? Griffin? Yeah, they didn't want the president to look weak. And I know it's just sad to say, obviously, a person with a disability, they can be a strong leader. But during the time of the 1930s through the Great Depression and World War II, it was probably in the best interest to try to hide these pictures from the American public because these people didn't have jobs. They lived in Hoovervilles, which we mentioned. They're kind of struggling out in the frontier as Okies, walking place to place, wandering across the frontier. And they just needed some sort of light, some sort of hope. And showing the president in a wheelchair probably wasn't going to do that for many Americans. And it's like they would just give up and not really follow suit with his plans, with his objectives. So how else did FDR reach out to the American public? What did he do? Kale, go ahead. Yeah, radio broadcasts. Good. And what are they called? Fireside Chats. Good job. And with these Fireside Chats, this is the first time American president reached out to the public directly. And he was doing so through radio broadcasts. And he was informing the American public of these New Deal agencies, how he's going to try to give these people opportunities to make a wage, and spend that in an economy. And eventually, with World War II, obviously some of the outcomes and some of the plans by the military in the Pacific theater and European theater. So again, he was very progressive. He was a person that was looking to try to inform the American public, okay, and not really just keep them out of the light, not keep them out of the workings of what the government's trying to do to benefit the people. At the same time, though, he received a lot of kickback. Why do you think he would receive a lot of kickback with this New Deal and a lot of these agencies created by the government? What do you think? Kara, what do you think? What was going on in the 1920s that many people were afraid of that would spread all across the country? Coming from Eastern Europe, Russia, Soviet Union. War, okay, all right, so an internal war, maybe internal struggle. But what was that fear, that spread of what? Barbara? Communism, yep, good job. So as the government's picking up its role in the economy, picking up its role in society, okay, many people thought that this was the oncoming of communism in American economy. But the government's giving these people jobs, pretty much telling them what to do. We'll talk about the Agricultural Adjustment Agency maybe today, tomorrow, where they're literally telling farmers not to grow crops and just paying them to do nothing. And Social Security, which we'll mention, which is still around today, and how this is giving a compensation to people that can no longer work, that are too old or maybe disabled, okay, and how this was a big fear. And this is a huge change for our society. All right, here are your terms for today. There's just a few agencies that I'd like you to look up. Like I mentioned, we'll talk about some of these today and more tomorrow. On Wednesday, I'd like to review it with you guys of the New Deal. So how about we break them up? I know there's a lot there. How about we just do these 4 today? So some of these agencies, you'll research more tomorrow. I think the TVA, the CCC especially. NRA, it's not the National Rifle Association. So it's not that one. So when you're researching that agency, just type in NRA, great New Deal, all right? So make sure we're all on the same page. All right, there you go. All right, so what do we have for the FDIC? What do we have for the FDIC? What do we got? Chloe, what do you have for this? Okay, all right. So this was an agency that was designed to give more trust to the banking system, okay, to help these people trust in obviously keeping savings account, understand the interest and levels of interest so that people have a stronger trust in the economy. All right, so we'll talk about it with the stock market crash in 1929. What do you think these Americans did with their savings account in the banks? Do you think they left them in there for the banks to obviously just no. So a lot of these people with bank runs, they ran to the bank to try to withdraw all their money from the bank as soon as possible because there's only a limited amount of cash in the bank at a certain time, right? But the FDIC was aimed to try to make sure that there would be a little bit more trust in the bank system and to help people and assure people that their money's there when they want to try to withdraw it or maybe even deposit more. Okay, that's just not a fixed amount of cash that's within the bank. So this was to try to aim people to be more trustworthy of the banks. And then we'll talk about it with a bank holiday a little bit more today. I should have had those terms in for you today. I apologize. TVA, what do you have for the TVA? TVA. Kale, go ahead. Yeah, good job. So the Tennessee Valley Authority, and this was like the Hoover Dam, a way to try to provide electricity and to inspire industrialization, agricultural growth in the Southeast United States. So we mentioned about how the Hoover Dam was mostly created for Southwest U.S. Now the TVA, same thing in Southeastern United States. This is going to try to help inspire industrialization by providing and creating power, okay, generating power to this part of the country. So with more industrialization means more jobs, more people are making wages. So they need a way to try to generate power to these remote locations in the United States. So the TVA was aimed to do that. You guys will read more about that tomorrow. The CCC, what do we have here? Gabe, what do you have for the CCC?
The Civilian Conservation Corps.
Good.
And it was a voluntary public work relief program.
Yeah.
For the unemployed, unmarried men ages 18 to 25, and then expanded to 17 to 28.
Yeah, good job. So this was a job for young men. So people, men that were going into adulthood, and this was going to give them a job. Okay, this was going to give them housing, give them food. And their goal is to try to help with some of the compiling issues in the Midwest. So remember we talked about the Dust Bowl, right? So the CCC was going to try to help with the environmental impacts that the Dust Bowl left. So help planting vegetation, planting crops, and understanding farming techniques for future years. So this was a way to try to inspire young people to get involved in farming and understand techniques and practical techniques to apply to farming so that we don't see disasters like the Dust Bowl ever happening again. The CCC also created many national and state parks all across the United States, mostly in the Midwest and the West. But this was a way for many of these young men to have food on the table, give them a job, okay, and housing. So in a way, this was kind of like a camp for them, where they would go and make an earning, okay, make a wage, and just understand how to properly farm and properly take care of the environment. All right, NRA. What do we have for the NRA? Eddie, what do you have?
The National Recovery Administration.
Good.
The goal was to eliminate cutthroat competition by bringing industry, labor, and government together to create codes of fair practices, set prices. Yeah, good job. Good job.
So National Recovery Administration was aimed to try to eliminate competition in the workplace, competition in businesses. At this point during the Great Depression, we need to try to have as many businesses out there as possible so that people are making wage and they can spend the economy. And if you have these monopolies, these larger corporations taking hold, they might take opportunities away from smaller businesses. So again, during Depression, we can't have that. So this was going to set prices, set wages for people, and at the same time, eliminate competition to a point where it was taking away these smaller businesses from having an opportunity. A lot of these agencies sound a lot like what? The Square Deal, right? By Teddy Roosevelt. It's just a little bit more ramped up at this point, especially going through a depression. So kind of taking that idea of Teddy Roosevelt in the early 1900s and applying it now during a Great Depression. All right, so real quick, I just want to talk about the 3 R's of the Great Depression, or sorry, the New Deal during the Great Depression, and how FDR is going to try to get the economy back on its feet. All right, so we mentioned about FDR and some of the struggles that he faced within his life. Obviously, with his braces, he couldn't really walk. He was paralyzed really from the waist down, and how he had to be propped up. And how many of these pictures of him in a wheelchair you really couldn't see because they're trying to hide it from the American public. But not only did he have these personal issues, he had to help the United States through the most troubling times we've ever encountered, which is the Great Depression and then eventually World War II. So how he's going to do that? First, well, with the economy, with the Great Depression, the New Deal. All right, so the New Deal was aimed to try to provide people jobs and provide people opportunities. And he did so with the 3 R's. The 3 R's, I'll just release this. Which I'd like you guys to know, this will definitely go on the test. The first one is relief. So release. And how are we going to try? How is FDR going to show relief to the American public? What's he going to do? What do you think? What do you think? Griffin, what do you think? Yeah, giving people jobs, right? Give people hope. And at the same time, these people that are struggling through these hardships that maybe they can't work, maybe they're at an age where they can't find a job, or obviously they're too old to work, or maybe they're disabled, they can't work. This is going to give them some sort of compensation to get them through these hard times, to put food on the table and really just keep the lights on in the house. So through relief, this is a way to try to give unemployed American workers, obviously, jobs and give them some sort of compensation. So relief is helping the unemployed. Helping the unemployed. And we mentioned about one of these agencies already, the Ccc. So the Ccc was aimed to give young adults, young men, a job, give them housing, food, and understand farming practices and farming techniques, and help give them an insight of conservation, okay, helping create state and national parks all throughout the frontier of the United States. So the Ccc is a great example of relief and how it's giving these younger men an opportunity for work and just understanding practices in the environment and farming so that we don't see the Dust Bowl ever again. And I kind of mentioned one already for unemployed workers. So many Americans that are too old to work, can't go into factories, industries anymore, or maybe they're just disabled. Okay, maybe they don't have the ability to work anymore. This is the Social Security Act. So I'll just put Social Security. Social Security, which we still have today, right? Many of these agencies kind of fell apart, right? Many of them didn't really last the length of time. Some of them lasted the whole Great Depression. Some of them lasted really just for maybe a month or two because they just lost funding by the government. And some of them are still around today. And one of them is Social Security, which everybody still has. Now, there's always the questions, is it going to run out, right? And that's alarming for many people to realize. Maybe they just have to raise the rates for American paychecks, obviously, through their paychecks, to keep this program running. And this is a way to give people that are retired, okay, over 65, a compensation, give them pay to put food on the table and keep the lights on. And that's really what Social Security is for. But relief is a way of helping the unemployed, helping the people that don't have a job. And the CCC is a good example, and Social Security. All right, another R, recovery. So recovery. So recovery is aimed to try to help alleviate some of these issues that were caused by really poor farming techniques. And we talked about some of the government, how the government prompted many of these agencies, agriculture, these farmers to continue to grow crops as much as possible. And they never stopped them, right? They never stepped in to tell them to halt their production. And even in the industries and the factories, government never regulated some of these corporations from stopping their production. And if that continues to happen, well, we're going to see what we saw with the Great Depression, an oversaturated market. And this is to try to make and help the economy get back to where it was. So help the economy get back to where it was. And a good example would be the NRA, a term that you guys just looked up. So the National Recovery Administration. So this was aiming to try to get rid of competition in the workplace. All right. So we need to keep as many businesses and corporations open as possible so that these workers are making compensation, that they're making a wage. If not, well, the economy is not going to be boosted. Okay. If people aren't making a wage, then they can't spend it out in the economy. And there's no way that this is going to boost the US economy out of this Great Depression. So the NRA was aimed, a government agency, to try to help eliminate competition in the workplace and set wages and prices. So in other words, the minimum wage, right? And helping these people make a pay and compensation so that they could put food on the table. All right, so I also mentioned about how bank runs were problems, okay? And how the stock market crashed in 1929, many Americans ran to the bank to try to withdraw as much money as possible. And the reason for it is because they didn't trust the bank, right? When really hundreds and thousands of Americans ran to the bank to pull this money out, do you think the banks had the money there anymore? No, they didn't. Okay, they only had a limited amount of cash in the bank at one certain time. So when all these Americans rushed to the bank because their stocks plummeted because they lost everything through the stock market, the bank's like, well, we don't have any more cash. Okay, we're only set a limited amount here in the bank. And once that's used up, that's it. So people's savings were totally wiped out because there's only a limited amount of currency in the economy. Does that make sense? So obviously this pushed many Americans to realize, you know what, this isn't going to work out. We really can't trust the bank at all. So many Americans just stuff their money in, obviously, in their closets, under their mattresses. And the bank system was kind of failing to a point where this was going to put these banks out of operation. And we need to have some sort of banks to loan money out to people to buy homes, to buy farms. And the only way our economy boosts is if we're spending, if we're constantly spending out in the economy. And if there is no banks, how are we going to get these loans out to purchase, let's say, land or homes, or even, let's say, cars or any type of finalized products or goods? So we need to have that trust back in the bank system. And the only way we can do that is through really reform. So FDR is going to try to reform the American economy into a mixed market. So he's going to reform the economy. Way he does that is by the FDIC. And we'll talk about a bank holiday. So the FDIC was a way to try to have almost a reserve, right, of money for Americans. So when they go to maybe, let's say, withdrawal or deposit money in the bank, that there's a reserve still there, a stash of cash that's there in case of, let's say, an emergency. When many of these Americans are rushing to the bank to try to withdraw their cash, there's somewhat of an insurance right there for the American public, so that there isn't ever a loss of cash, or that there's never any cash left within the bank. So to try to prevent a bank run from ever happening and people to distrust the bank system, the FDIC was created. And that's still around today as well. Okay, whenever you make a deposit within the bank, a lot of times you'll see that check right there at the bottom of your receipt. It says FDIC. That's just to show as protection. The government's protecting your money and making sure that your savings accounts are never wiped out in case of, let's say, a bank run ever again. And FDR did that with a bank holiday. So the bank holiday was that he sent these government officials to make sure that these banks were running and operational, and that these banks are trusted by the people. And he'd make many fireside chats to prove that he's doing everything he can to bring this recovery, reform, and relief back to American people. So you guys go with the 3 R's. All right. So tomorrow, like I said, I'll have these agencies where you can research them, and you'll write a little bit about their significance, when they may be ended, and their importance to the economy during the Great Depression. How about I talk about the Fireside Chat assignment tomorrow? Does that work? Okay. Like I said, Friday, I like to have those. We'll present them. And you can just make it an audio file, or if you want to, you can act like the president, make a green screen behind you. Those of you who are good at YouTube, right? And you can present one of these agencies, obviously, to the rest of the class. All right, that's what I'm aiming for. That's what I'm looking for. All right, that's all I got.